The boy who never gave up. Have you ever wondered what it takes to rise from nothing? To build a life when the world has given you nothing but pain? Today, I'm going to share a story that will shake you to your core. A story of a boy who slept on sidewalks, polished shoes for pennies, and grew up without knowing a mother's love. But that's not where this story ends. Because one ordinary afternoon, when that boy had become a powerful man, a beggar woman stumbled in front of his car, and when she looked into his eyes and whispered one simple word, everything changed forever. This is the story of Victor Caldwell. Victor's story doesn't begin with triumph. It begins with tragedy. His father, Michael Caldwell, was a hard-working construction worker in Detroit, Michigan. Every morning, Michael would kiss his wife Sarah goodbye and head out to provide for his family. Sarah stayed home, caring for their 4 young children. Victor, the eldest, was only 7 years old. Then came his siblings, Katie, Nathan, and baby Ryan, who was barely 6 months old. They weren't rich, far from it, but their small apartment was filled with laughter, warmth, and love. Michael worked long hours, his hands calloused and tired. But every evening when he came home and saw his children's smiling faces, all that exhaustion melted away. Sarah was the heart of their home, a devoted mother who poured every ounce of love into her family. But life has a cruel way of changing everything in a single moment. One cold Tuesday morning, Michael left for work just like any other day. Sarah waved from the window, holding baby Ryan in her arms. Victor was getting ready for school. Everything was normal, everything was fine, until it wasn't. At exactly 10:47 a.m., a speeding semi-truck ran a red light at the intersection of Woodward Avenue. Michael never saw it coming. The impact was instantaneous. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Michael Caldwell was gone. When the police knocked on Sarah's door that afternoon, her world shattered into a million pieces. She collapsed to her knees, her screams echoing through the hallway. Neighbors rushed to help, but there was nothing anyone could do. No words could bring Michael back. No comfort could fill the void he left behind. The funeral came and went. People offered condolences, brought casseroles, promised they'd be there. But as the weeks passed, those promises faded. The neighbors returned to their lives, the phone calls stopped, and Sarah was left alone with 4 hungry children and no idea how to survive. At first, she tried. God, how she tried. Sarah took cleaning jobs, scrubbing floors in office buildings, washing dishes in restaurant kitchens. She'd leave before dawn and return after dark. But there was a problem. Baby Ryan couldn't be left alone. Victor, Katie, and Nathan were too young to watch themselves, so sometimes Sarah had no choice but to lock the older kids inside and take Ryan with her to work. It was impossible. Absolutely impossible. Employers complained that she was distracted, that she couldn't focus, that the crying baby was disruptive. One by one, they let her go. Within 3 months, Sarah had no job, no income, and no food in the cabinets. Victor would never forget those nights. The way his little brother and sister cried from hunger, the way his mother sat against the wall, staring at nothing, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." He was only 7, but he understood. They were slowly starving. One evening, after 2 full days without food, Sarah made a decision that would haunt her forever. She looked at her 4 children, their eyes hollow with hunger, and knew she had failed them. She couldn't be the mother they needed. She couldn't feed them. She couldn't save them. But maybe someone else could. The next morning, Sarah dressed her children in their cleanest clothes. She held them close, breathing in their scent, memorizing the feel of their small bodies against hers. Then she walked them to Hope Haven Children's Home, an orphanage on the east side of Detroit. The building loomed before them, cold and institutional. Sarah's hands trembled as she knocked. When the door opened, she could barely speak through her tears. "Please," she choked out. "I can't feed them. I can't keep them alive. Please take care of my babies." The staff member's face softened with compassion. She'd seen this before, too many times. Sarah knelt down, pulling each child into her arms one last time. She kissed their foreheads, whispered, "I love you," into their ears, and prayed they wouldn't remember this moment. Victor, old enough to understand what was happening, grabbed his mother's sleeve. "Mom, don't leave me. Please, I'll be good. I won't ask for food. Just don't leave." Sarah's heart splintered. She wanted to scoop him up and run. But where? Back to an empty apartment? Back to watching her children waste away. She forced herself to stand, to step back, to let the staff member guide her children inside. With every step away from that building, she died a little more. The years that followed were cold and mechanical. Victor and his siblings adapted to life at Hope Haven. The staff was kind enough, but nothing could replace a mother's love. And then, one by one, families came to adopt. Katie left first, taken in by a young couple from Ann Arbor. Then Nathan found a home with a family in Grand Rapids. Finally, baby Ryan, with his bright eyes and chubby cheeks, was swept up by a loving family in Bloomfield Hills. But nobody wanted Victor. He was too old, they said. Too set in his ways, too damaged. He watched through the window as car after car pulled away, taking other children to real homes, to real families. And each time, he felt the rejection a little deeper. Victor stayed at Hope Haven until he turned 18. By law, they had to let him go. On his last day, he packed his few belongings into a worn backpack and walked out onto the streets of Detroit with $73 to his name and nowhere to go. Most people would have crumbled, most people would have given up, but something inside Victor refused to break. Maybe it was the memory of his father's work ethic. Maybe it was the determination to prove everyone wrong. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he was just too stubborn to quit. He found work delivering newspapers at 4 a.m. The pay was terrible, barely enough for a meal and a spot on someone's couch. But it was something. And Victor had learned a crucial truth. Something was always better than nothing. During the day, he attended community college classes. At night, he worked whatever odd jobs he could find, shining shoes outside office buildings, washing cars in parking lots, tutoring kids in math and English. He slept in shelters, on benches, sometimes in 24-hour diners, where sympathetic waitresses let him nurse a coffee for hours. The years blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and determination. But slowly, impossibly, Victor built a foundation. He earned his associate's degree, then his bachelor's. He lived on ramen noodles and determination, studying by streetlight when he couldn't afford electricity. One day, while delivering papers, a headline caught his eye. From poverty to power, farm worker's son becomes FBI agent. Victor stopped dead in his tracks. The article told the story of someone who had nothing and became something, someone who refused to let circumstances define him. That night, Victor made a decision that would change everything. He was going to become a police officer. Not just any officer. He wanted to join the elite. He wanted to prove that someone from nothing could become someone important. He set his sights on becoming a state trooper, a position that required passing one of the most competitive exams in the country. People with advantages, with tutors and prep courses, often failed. Victor had none of that. He had the public library and sheer willpower. For 3 years, he studied every spare moment. While other people his age were at bars and parties, Victor was memorizing law codes and practicing interview questions. He took practice exams until his eyes burned. He ran miles every morning to build his physical strength. He pushed himself beyond exhaustion, beyond reason. The day of the exam, Victor showed up in his only dress shirt, slightly yellowed from years of wear. His shoes were scuffed but polished to a shine. He looked around at the other candidates in their expensive suits and designer watches, and he felt that old familiar feeling of not belonging. But then he remembered every hungry night, every rejection, every person who had looked at him like he was nothing, and he walked into that exam room with his head held high. Months later, Victor was washing a car for a local businessman named Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson had been kind to Victor over the years, often overpaying him and sometimes slipping him extra cash for food. On this particular day, Victor had asked Mr. Henderson to check the exam results online. Mr. Henderson sat on his porch steps, refreshing the page every few minutes. Then suddenly, he jumped to his feet, his phone clattering to the ground. "Victor! Victor!" he shouted, running toward the driveway. "You did it! You passed! You're going to be a state trooper!" The washcloth fell from Victor's hands. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then the tears came. Years of pain and struggle pouring out in great heaving sobs. Mr. Henderson wrapped him in a bear hug. both men crying openly in that driveway. Victor Caldwell, the orphan nobody wanted, had made it. The training was grueling, but Victor thrived. He graduated at the top of his class and received his first assignment in Riverside County, a mid-sized district outside of Detroit. The boy who once slept on park benches now drove a police cruiser. The kid who begged for spare change now wore a badge. But success didn't change who Victor was at his core. He remained humble, hard-working, and deeply committed to helping others. He became known as a fair but firm officer, someone who treated everyone with dignity, regardless of their circumstance. 5 years into his career, Victor received a promotion to detective. He was assigned to a high-profile case, and on this particular afternoon, he was driving back from a critical meeting at headquarters. His patrol car moved steadily through the streets, his mind focused on the case details. Then, without warning, an elderly woman stumbled directly into his path. His driver slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt just inches from her. Victor's security detail jumped out, ready to move the woman aside, but Victor raised his hand. "Wait," he said quietly. "I'll handle this." He stepped out of the car and approached the woman slowly. She was frail, her clothes tattered and dirty. Her hair was matted, her face weathered by years of hardship. She looked confused, disoriented, like she didn't quite know where she was. As Victor got closer, the woman looked up at him. Their eyes met, and in a trembling, broken voice, she whispered, "Son, you came back. Did you bring me food?" Victor froze. That one word, son, hit him like a physical blow. In his entire life, no one had ever called him that. No one had ever claimed him as their own. Something about this moment felt impossibly significant, though he couldn't explain why. His eyes filled with tears. "Ma'am," he said softly, "who are you? Why are you out here like this?" The woman's eyes were distant, confused. "You said you'd bring food. Where have you been?" Victor realized she was mentally confused, possibly suffering from dementia or trauma. But something about her pulled at his heart. He made a decision in that moment that would change both their lives. "Come with me," he said gently, taking her arm. "I'll get you some food." He helped her into his car and instructed his driver to take them to a nearby diner. The sight of a high-ranking officer bringing a homeless woman to lunch turned heads, but Victor didn't care. He sat across from her and ordered her a hot meal, then watched as she ate ravenously, like she hadn't eaten in days. After she finished, Victor knew he couldn't just leave her on the streets. He took her to Riverside General Hospital and personally oversaw her admission. He spoke with the doctors, arranged for her treatment, and made it clear that all expenses would be covered. "Take care of her," he told the medical staff. "Call me with any updates on her condition." Over the next 6 months, Victor visited regularly. He brought flowers, sat by her bedside, held her hand. The woman, whom the hospital staff called Jane Doe until they could determine her identity, slowly began to recover. The medication and therapy were working. Then one day, Victor received a call. "Detective Caldwell, she's showing significant improvement. She's asking to see you." Victor rushed to the hospital. When he entered her room, the woman was sitting up, her eyes clearer than he'd ever seen them. "Hello," Victor said softly, sitting beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then tears began to stream down her face. "You've been so kind to me. Why? Why would you do this for a stranger?" Victor smiled sadly. "Because when we met, you called me son. I grew up without a mother. I spent my whole life wishing someone would claim me. That one word meant more to me than you could ever know," the woman sobbed. "Young man, I need to tell you something. My name is Sarah Caldwell. I had 4 children once, but my husband died, and I couldn't feed them. I couldn't watch them starve. So I did the unthinkable. I took them to an orphanage and left them there." Victor's world tilted. His hands began to shake. What was your oldest son's name?" Sarah closed her eyes, tears flowing freely. "Victor." His name was Victor. The room spun. Victor couldn't breathe. He stared at this woman, this broken, lost woman, and suddenly saw past the years of hardship to the face beneath. The face from his earliest, haziest memories. "Mom!" The word came out as barely a whisper. Sarah's eyes flew open. She looked at him, really looked at him, and gasped, "Victor! My Victor!" They crashed into each other's arms, both sobbing uncontrollably. 25 years of separation, pain, and longing poured out in that hospital room. Victor held his mother like he would never let go, and Sarah clung to her son like he was her lifeline back to the living. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah explained everything through her tears. After leaving the children at the orphanage, she had wandered the streets in a daze of grief. She'd been hit by a car, suffering a traumatic brain injury that stole most of her memories. For years, she lived on the streets, her mind fractured, unable to remember her own name or her children's faces. Only fragments remained, haunting her like ghosts. "I never forgot you," she wept. "I couldn't remember, but I never forgot." Some part of me was always searching. Victor made another decision. "You're coming home with me. I'm not letting you go again. Ever." He brought Sarah to his house, a modest but comfortable home he'd worked so hard to afford. He set her up in the guest room, made sure she had everything she needed. For the first time in his life, Victor Caldwell had a mother. But the story wasn't quite complete. Sarah asked about her other children. Victor's heart ached as he conducted searches, using his law enforcement resources to track down Katie, Nathan, and Ryan. What he found brought him both pain and relief. Katie had been adopted by wonderful parents and was now a schoolteacher in Ann Arbor. Nathan had become an engineer, living a successful life in Chicago. Ryan, the baby who couldn't even remember their mother, was now a college student in Boston, thriving in his adoptive family. Victor visited each of them from a distance, watching them from afar. He saw Katie playing with her own children in a park. He saw Nathan presenting at a tech conference. He saw Ryan laughing with friends on a campus quad. They were happy. They had moved on. They had families who loved them. When Victor returned home, Sarah asked about them. He took her hands in his and said gently, "Mom, they're all okay. More than okay. They have families who raised them, who love them. I don't think we should disrupt their lives. They've found peace." Sarah wept, but she understood. "You're right. As long as they're happy, that's all that matters." "Besides," Victor said with a small smile, "you and I found each other. Isn't that miracle enough?" A year later, Sarah approached Victor one evening as he sat reading case files. "Victor, honey, you should think about settling down, getting married, starting your own family." Victor looked up at his mother, now healthy and vibrant, her eyes full of love and hope. And he realized she was right. He'd built a career, found his mother, but his life still felt incomplete. Through a friend, he met Emma, a social worker with a kind heart and gentle smile. She understood his background, his struggles, and loved him not despite them, but because of who they'd made him become. Victor and Emma's wedding was simple but beautiful. Sarah sat in the front row, crying happy tears as she watched her son marry the love of his life. When Victor and Emma exchanged vows, promising to build a family based on love and commitment, Sarah thought her heart might burst with joy. Emma and Sarah became incredibly close, their relationship blossoming into something beautiful. Emma treated Sarah like her own mother, caring for her with tenderness and respect. When Victor came home from work each evening, he'd find them cooking together, laughing at some private joke, and he'd think about how far they'd all come. This wasn't just Victor's redemption, it was all of theirs. Victor Caldwell's story isn't just about one man's triumph. It's about resilience, hope, and the unbreakable human spirit. It's about a boy who had every reason to fail but refused to accept that fate. It's about a mother who made an impossible choice and lived with that guilt until fate gave her a second chance. It's about how sometimes, when you least expect it, life offers you redemption. Victor could have become bitter. He could have blamed his mother, blamed the system, blamed the world for his suffering. Instead, he channeled his pain into purpose. He worked when others slept. He studied when others partied. He believed when others doubted. And most importantly, when he found a broken woman on the street, he didn't see a burden. He saw someone who needed help. He saw humanity. And in showing her compassion, he found the very person he'd been missing his entire life. Some people spend their whole lives making excuses. They blame their circumstances, their background, their lack of resources. Victor had less than most people will ever experience, yet he built more than most people will ever achieve. The real lesson here isn't just about success, it's about character. It's about maintaining your humanity even when the world has stripped away everything else. It's about understanding that the choices we make in our darkest moments define us more than the circumstances that created those moments. Victor could have walked past that woman on the street. He was busy, important, heading to a critical meeting, but he stopped. He cared, he helped, and in doing so, he saved not just her life, but completed his own. Moral of the story: your past doesn't determine your future. Your choices do. Success isn't measured by what you gain, but by who you become and how you treat others along the way. The broken pieces of our lives, when held up to the light, can form the most beautiful mosaics. Call to action. If this story moved you, if Victor's journey inspired you, then share it. Subscribe to hear more true stories of transformation and redemption. And remember, wherever you are in life right now, whatever challenges you're facing, you have the strength to overcome them. Your story isn't over. Keep going. Keep believing. Your breakthrough might be just around the corner.